Okay, I want you to take a really close look at this photograph. Right off the bat, your brain is probably screaming, fake, right? Maybe a clever Photoshop job or, I don't know, a genuine glitch in the timeline? Because you see the Great Sphinx of Giza, this timeless symbol of ancient Egypt, but standing right in front of it are samurai warriors? It just feels wrong, like 2 pages from a history book got accidentally glued together. Today, we're going to unravel the incredible and totally true story behind this impossible image. It's a story of a desperate mission that connects the ancient world with the industrial age, all captured in one single, haunting photo.
All right, let's set the scene. The year is 1864. Now, to really get how bizarre this image is, you have to put yourself in that moment. In America, the Civil War is tearing the country apart, fought with rifles and cannons and ironclad warships. Over in Europe, the Industrial Revolution is roaring at full steam. Factories are literally changing the skyline with smoke, and thousands of miles of railroad tracks are crisscrossing continents. This is an age of steam, iron, gunpowder, and global empires. And yet, somehow, somewhere in the Egyptian desert, a photographer sets up his big, bulky camera and captures this.
And then, there they are. Warriors from a world away and a world apart. You can see the details so clearly. The formal kamishimo robes, the iconic chonmage top-knot hairstyle, which was a huge symbol of their status, and tucked right into their belts, the daisho, the twin swords, the long katana, and the short wakizashi. And those weren't just weapons, they were the very soul of the samurai. It is the feudal Middle Ages smashing right into the industrial world, all in one frame. And the absolute wildest part of all this photo, it's 100% real. No tricks.
So how in the world did this happen? Well, this wasn't some weird accident or the world's strangest tourist trip. Nope. These men were on a desperate, high-stakes diplomatic mission. They were warriors and scholars sent from a nation that had been totally sealed off from the rest of the world on one last, desperate attempt to save their entire way of life from the unstoppable march of the modern age.
So, to get how they ended up in Egypt, of all places, we got to go back to where they came from. A world that hadn't just, fallen behind the times, it had been intentionally frozen, locked inside a cultural and technological time bubble for more than 200 years.
This all came down to a policy called sakoku, which literally means locked country. For over 200 years, Japan was a total hermit kingdom. Under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, if you tried to leave the country, the penalty was death. If foreign sailors were shipwrecked on their shores, they were often executed. So while the rest of the world is going through the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution, Japan is living in this perfectly preserved feudal society ruled by the law of the sword.
But, bubbles are made to burst. And in 1853, theirs didn't just pop, it was shattered. An American naval officer, Commodore Matthew Perry, sails this fleet of massive, steam-powered warships right into Tokyo Bay. To the Japanese, who had only ever known wooden sailing ships, these things were terrifying monsters. They called them the kurofune, the black ships, belching smoke and just bristling with cannons aimed right at their capital. Perry's message was simple, and it was backed by some serious firepower. Open your country for trade, or we're going to open it for you.
And this, right here, just lays it all out. The gap was massive. On one side, you have swords and shoguns. On the other, the Industrial Revolution and global empires. So you can imagine the shogunate, the government, they absolutely panicked. They were staring down an industrial machine they couldn't possibly fight with swords and cannons from 100 years ago. They were forced to sign what they called the unequal treaties, opening their ports and giving up humiliating concessions to the West. And this sparked a huge crisis across Japan, with the proud warrior class screaming to expel the barbarians and go back into hiding. Okay, so here's the crucial part. In this total moment of desperation, the shogun comes up with a plan that is, well, it's frankly delusional. He's stuck between these foreign powers he can't beat and his own warriors who he can't control. So he decides to send a diplomatic mission to Europe with a completely impossible goal: convince the West to just tear up the treaties, go home, and let Japan turn back the clock.
And the guy they picked to lead this suicide mission, basically, was Ikeda Nagaoki, a high-ranking samurai official and just 27 years old. He and his team of 34 men were sent to Paris to persuade the French Emperor Napoleon III to cancel the treaties and abandon the port of Yokohama. He was basically sent into a time machine with one order: find the off switch and bring us back to the good old days.
You have to understand, their trip to Europe wasn't just a long journey. It was a non-stop barrage of future shock. They get on this French warship, and their diaries show they were absolutely terrified by the monstrous, vibrating noise of the steam engine.
They had no idea how to use a Western toilet. And they found food like bread and cheese, which they said smelled of rancid milk, completely repulsive.
And their very first stop, Shanghai, was a massive wake-up call. For centuries, Japan had looked up to China as this great, untouchable civilization. But what they saw horrified them. It was a colonized city, chopped up by foreign powers, with British and French soldiers just shoving Chinese people around on their own streets. This quote from one of their diaries, man, it just says it all. Their biggest fear was suddenly staring them right in the face. This wasn't just about cool new technology. It was about survival. If they failed, this was Japan's future.
All right, so this journey of one shocking revelation after another eventually leads them to Egypt. And it's here, on their way to Europe, that a chance meeting with a photographer named Antonio Beato creates the historical puzzle that we're talking about today, freezing this incredible collision of worlds in a single photograph.
See, the Suez Canal wasn't finished yet, so the group had to travel overland from the port of Suez to Cairo. So how'd they do it? They took a train. I mean, just try to picture it. Samurai. On a train. In the desert. These were men who had lived their entire lives in a world of horses and walking, now riding a steam locomotive across the Egyptian sand. The clatter of the iron wheels, the hiss of the steam, it must have felt like absolute magic.
So while they're standing there, posing for this now famous photo, you'd think they'd be blown away by the pyramids, right? But their minds were somewhere else entirely. Their diaries showed they were way more impressed by the train that got them there than by the ancient wonders. They saw an ancient, great civilization that had been conquered. And it hit them like a ton of bricks. Ancient greatness means nothing if you don't have modern power.
From Egypt, they kept going all the way to Paris, and if the journey so far was future shock, Paris was a complete system meltdown. They stayed at the Grand Hôtel du Louvre, this palace of gaslights, velvet carpets, and all these strange technologies. They were apparently really suspicious of the elevator and reportedly chose to walk up 5 flights of stairs in their formal robes instead of trusting the ascending room.
But hey, this wasn't just a fancy trip. Ikeda finally gets his meeting with the French foreign minister. Can you just imagine the scene? This young samurai, standing in front of the ministers of one of the most powerful empires on Earth, a world away from everything he'd ever known, and he stands his ground and delivers his demand, the whole reason he traveled halfway across the planet. So, what was France's response? How did this modern industrial empire, an empire built on global trade and colonialism, react to a request from an isolated feudal nation to just pack up and go home?
Well, they pretty much laughed him out of the room. The answer was an absolute, non-negotiable no. It was just unthinkable. And not only that, they gave him a pretty stark warning. If Japan tried to forcibly close the port of Yokohama, France and its allies would see it as an act of war, and they would invade. The mission was a complete, total failure.
So, the mission was a total bust, a spectacular failure. But, right there, in that moment of defeat, Ikeda Nagaoki makes a decision, an incredibly brave, career-ending, history-changing decision. Everything he'd seen on his journey, the colonized cities, the powerful warships, the trains, had shown him the truth. He knew that his government's plan to expel the barbarians was just a suicide note.
And here's the absolute key. He flat out disobeyed his direct orders. For a samurai, this is insane. It's basically treason. Instead of arguing for isolation, he signed a new agreement, promising to increase cooperation with France. He realized the only way for Japan to survive was not to hide from the modern world, but to master it. So he bought books on physics, military strategy, and engineering, and he got ready to go home and tell his government the hard truth.
So he goes home, ready to save his country, and what kind of welcome does he get? Not a hero's, that's for sure. The shogun was furious at his defiance. The government was still in denial, just clinging to the past. For his courage, for his vision, Ikeda was stripped of his rank, his titles, and his lance. He was placed under permanent house arrest. His career was over, a prophet punished for being right way too soon.
And this timeline, right here, is exactly why that photograph is so incredibly haunting. History proved Ikeda right, and it happened fast. Just 4 years after he got back, the shogunate completely collapsed. The Meiji Restoration kicked off, this frantic period of modernization where Japan raced to catch up with the West. And by 1876, a little more than a decade after that photo was taken, the samurai class itself was officially abolished. That's the thing. When that photographer's shutter clicked in the desert, these men, they were already ghosts. They just didn't know it yet.
The crazy irony is that the very modern world they were sent to reject was the same world Japan would desperately race to become just a few years later. But the men in this photo? They never got to see it. They are frozen forever in that strange, impossible moment. Representatives of a feudal past captured by a modern technology, standing before a monument to the ancient world. They are a perfect metaphor for a nation right on the edge of unimaginable change.
You know, this whole story just goes to show that history isn't always this neat, straight line we read about in books. Sometimes the timelines cross, and the past and the future meet unexpectedly in the desert to have their picture taken. Their image is a powerful reminder of a world that was about to disappear forever. And it leaves you wondering, if you had one chance to capture a moment where two eras collided, what would it be?